Hey everyone, my name is Josh. I run a podcast called Pursuit of Infinity, which talks about esoteric philosophy and mainly psychedelics as a tool for spiritual and therapeutic and medicinal health.
Okay, I'm curious, what counts as, esoteric philosophy, what counts as esoteric?
Anything that to me goes against the grain of what we've been taught in our sort of materialist paradigm, what we've been taught in school. All of the things that they told you couldn't exist, whether it be spirituality, Eastern thought, all kinds of philosophy that essentially go against the grain of what we've been taught.
So you just lump in anything that feels sort of countercultural? Does it all get kind of lumped in there?
Yeah, pretty much, because I find that I have an interest in all of this stuff. I don't really subscribe to too much. I don't subscribe to too many conspiracies or too much. I don't really attach myself too much to my thoughts and opinions. I like to be open to everything, and just things that interest me are, on the edges, the peripheral of society and culture.
Okay, so tell me how you first got interested in psychedelics. What age and why?
So it was around 2015 or 16. I started to do a lot of research into politics because, you had this election where during the primaries, you had Bernie Sanders versus Hillary Clinton, these two big Democratic names. And then on the other side, you had Donald Trump, and he was just thrashing his way through the Republican Party. And it was just a really interesting time politically. So I, along with a lot of other people, started to become pretty engaged in that. And that's when I started to realize that there has to be some other way to do the stuff that we're doing. There has to be some other way, because when I would look at the Democratic side, I would see the status quo versus the quote unquote revolution of Bernie Sanders. And then you see the other side, the Republicans, who are also very status quo. And you're seeing Donald Trump break through as a guy who's fundamentally different. And both of them didn't really seem to capture what I thought the direction of our country should go in. So that's pretty much where it started, with politics and trying to navigate my way through finding a way forward that wasn't in the same path that we were currently on. And it led me to looking into some interesting people that introduced me to these topics.
Okay, let me ask about that, because you did identify, you said you looked at the Democrats and the Republicans, and you said, okay, there's kind of a status quo person, but then there's a person who is supposed to be the one, as you said, like Bernie Sanders, feels like a revolution. And then on the other side, you had kind of status quo Republicans, and then Trump, who was aggravating the entire party. So how come in sort of like seeing another path, you weren't just like, yeah, revolution, or just thumbing your nose at the other side? That's enough. Just breaking from the status quo is enough. What do you remember? What you kind of identified or what you felt in there that didn't feel quite right as a path?
Yeah, I know. I've always had this thing inside of me that has been attracted to people who exemplify love and compassion, and I didn't see that on either side. And what I did see was the left, who, both sides really, they became more volatile toward one another. So what I saw was each of these countercultural paths, although seemed attractive in their own ways, were just sort of further dividing people. And I don't think that's the way to do it.
So so I find it fascinating that politics led you to psychedelics. So what was the first sort of philosophical gateway drug? Who was the first person or the first group of people that started getting you thinking there could be another path as you went looking?
So there are two guys, they're brothers, Terrence and Dennis McKenna.
Okay.
So I watched this crazy documentary, and it's called DMT, the Spirit Molecule. And DMT is a very potent psychedelic. And basically what this documentary went over was there was a guy who did the first clinical trials since the Controlled Substances Act was put into place. That was 1970, I believe, that they put that into place. So in the 90s, this guy named Rick Strassman, he did a bunch of studies with DMT where he would inject people with DMT, and he would essentially just measure their vitals, all of the specific like medical measurements that you would expect someone to be measuring for anything. Okay. Very basic stuff. And what he found was that people were coming out of these experiences and they were claiming that they met God and that they were transported to alternate dimensions and they were speaking with entities. And, he would basically say to them, okay, that's all fine and good. But you realize this is like a hallucination, right? And this isn't anything that is really beneficial to my research. And they said, no, Mr. Strassman, this was more real than this reality here. And that's when I really started to think, like, what are these substances and what kind of experiences can a person have that makes you feel like you're visiting something that has like a structural reality that is ineffable, you cannot describe with language, and that they claim is more real than real. And that's what started me down this path so that's when I was introduced to Dennis McKenna, and then his older brother, Terrence, is the guy who really just set it all off for me. I mean, he's a psychedelic bard. He was just an insane philosopher that had such a way with words, and really just attracted me to the topic even more.
Okay, so now you've watched some videos, you've listened, you've read some stuff. What was your next step in your exploration?
So my next step was obtaining some of these substances and trying to get there myself.
Okay.
And the easiest way forward there is psilocybin mushrooms. So that's the one that I seeked out, and I ended up getting myself some, and the rest is history.
Do you remember, so up until that point, what substances, if any, had you used to try to alter your consciousness, to either calm yourself down, to hype yourself up, or to try to put yourself in a different state than your normal day-to-day?
So only marijuana and alcohol. I was never the type of person that delved into drugs of any sort. I'd never tried anything hard, no coke, heroin, nothing. No meth, any of that stuff. So my gateway drug was marijuana.
Were you going to did you do this by yourself? What was your first experience with eating mushrooms?
So it was funny. I had a very good friend of mine who, he was like a kind of a rebel in high school.
Okay.
And he was, he did a lot of drugs, a lot of psychedelics, in the wrong environment, in the wrong setting. So, at one time, I knew he was experienced with this stuff, so I approached him and I said, "Hey, man, like, why don't we try taking mushrooms in this container with this specific set and setting is what they call it, a mindset, which is like what you bring to it, your intentions, why you're doing it, and also your environment, your setting. So you're not going to want to be in like a party setting or anything like that. You're going to want to be in a nice environment with beautiful music and, low lights, a very comfortable environment with people that you know."
Okay.
And he looked at me and he said, "Dude, I've done these drugs more times than you can count. You have no idea what you're talking about, but let's do it so I can show you what's what."
Okay.
And
when you described it to him, was his major complaint that like what you're describing is dumb and boring, and like these things are intended for this huge social experience that I've had before? That's what drugs are for. They're for this. So his idea going in is like, this is a dumb setup you're setting up. We're not going to have any fun. Was that did he tell you what he was worried about, or what he was like, this isn't going to work?
it was exactly that, but it was also that these substances cannot give you the experience that I was trying to describe to him was the goal.
Okay.
You know, the spiritual healing type of experience. He said that's not what these substances are about. They're just about getting high and seeing colors and having fun with your friends.
Right. Okay. All right. So what happens? You convince him, we're going to sit down, we're going to do this. How does it play out?
Man, so I used to be a very staunch atheist, very much so. And within the first 30 seconds of like the peak of the experience, that was gone. It was completely gone. And we looked at each other and we just had like this unspoken knowing that what I had told him was going to happen is exactly what happened. And we proceeded to have one of the most beautiful experiences of either of our lives.
This might run into a situation where you're like, well, what I experienced cannot be put into words, but I'm going to force you. So put into words that first experience that also absolutely confirmed that what you thought it was going to be like and what you've been told is exactly what happened. So what was it like?
I'll try to describe it as best I can. So what happens is it's like you start to feel the onset happen, and your body is telling you that something's going wrong, like your anxiety starts to rise. And at least for me, my anxiety would rise and the alarms would start going off in my head. It's like my mind, my ego is telling me that something is happening that's about to separate myself from my ego. And the only thing that my brain can interpret that as is death. So it's like all of those alarms are going off in your head that are trying to survive, essentially, that the monkey mind. And that fear is very natural. But after you sort of get past that fear and you surrender to the experience, what then happened was I felt this overall sense that my consciousness itself was ascending to like a higher level or a different place, if that makes any sense. And what that place was almost structured. When I close my eyes, because of course when your eyes are open, you see all kinds of craziness. Things are melting and all kinds of colors and things like that. But the rubber hits the road when you close your eyes, because then the external stimuli of your environment is not influencing the visual field that you're currently seeing. So when you close your eyes, it's almost as if your mind works with the psilocybin, the substance, to create these insane visuals that are impossible to describe, and that I felt there's no way my mind can come up with this. Like, I never thought that the shapes, the colors, the way that they moved, I didn't think that my mind could ever come up with this. And I mean, I was a graphic design student. I graduated college for graphic design. So you had
to use your imagination and creativity constantly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm steeped in art, I've, drawing and all kinds of, illustration and painting. And my mind knew that, I knew that I could never come up with this stuff in my most creative day. It was just insane. Like the visuals themselves are just these geometric, flowing, moving, living patterns. And along with the visuals, which are amazing, there's this sense of ego loss that the alarms were going off for a reason. Because what psilocybin does is it sort of slows down and shuts down your default mode network in your brain, which is the center for what you define yourself as. I know myself as Josh. I have certain preferences. I like ice cream and pizza and whatever. All of that stuff that I define myself as and my preferences it was starting to slip away from me. And the people in my life and the things that I cared about were also starting to slip away, like everything was. And I had to let all of that stuff go. And what it appeared in my field of vision in closed eyes was like, it was almost like this knit pattern or something like that, and of like squares, like a square quilt, and each of these quilts were like, each of the squares were something that I defined myself as, or something that was very important to me. And I just watched the threads unravel, and each of these squares individually would just vanish into darkness. So it was like a visualization of me like letting go of all of the things that I defined myself as, and all of the things that I thought were real and important and that I prioritized. And after this happened, and after it all just kind of like went away and I surrendered to the experience of like a ego disillusion, on the other side of that, that's where the real experience began. And that's where I felt what I can only describe as God. And this is an atheist, like a prior atheist coming to you saying this. Like the only definition, or the only word that would fit the definition of what I saw and what I felt, was a higher sense of spiritual intelligence, if that is a better word or a better phrase than God.
So this is the part I find interesting. So when you have people who have strange experiences, things that are outside the norm of the thing they normally do, I feel like, we talk about there's ego death and we talk about that the default mode gets shut down. But what gets described oftentimes is their brain trying to rationalize and make sense of what they're seeing. So the same storytelling brain that runs around and tells you you're Josh and that you ate those eggs because you like eggs and this is all part of your identity. Is there a reason that that it wasn't just rationalization and justifying of weird things your brain's seeing because you're tripping? Now you know it. There's a new, you said, I let the ego go, but now when I'm done with this, now I have a deeper sense. I know this next thing. Well, what if you just took your little knowledge thing and you kicked it up one level and your little rationalizer was still rationalizing while you're experiencing this very strange new knowledge?
That's a great question. And the way I think about it is the rationalization part of your mind is the part that keeps you grounded here. If you're having the experience and like say I would be going through this and I'm trying to rationalize and I'm trying to like understand what's happening and put labels on it and define exactly what's going on, that's going to keep me grounded and keep me here. And it's not going to allow me to fully experience what the substance is offering. So what you do is, or what I would do is I surrender to all definition, to all label, to all thought, and to all things that I attach myself to, whether it be intellectually, spiritually, philosophical, any of that stuff. And then what happens is this internal knowing. It's almost like a cool way I like to describe it. Is have you ever seen those? It's like an optical illusion image, and it's two faces on either side. And then in like the middle, it's that chalice thing, and it's black and white.
Yeah. So you depending on whether you're focusing on the black or the white, you'll see two different things.
Exactly. Yeah, yes.
Okay.
So it's almost like I was looking at that for 28, 29 years of my life, and I could only see the faces.
Okay.
And then this experience allowed me to see the center, allowed me to see that goblet image too, that was always there, but that I was never able to to perceive with my senses. And when it comes to you as an experience, as opposed to like someone telling you, I could sit down in a lecture hall and I could have someone say to me like, oh, the substance does this. And then when this happens, this means that you're meeting God or, whatever. But when you experience it and you feel it for yourself, it's real that way. It's almost like if someone tried to describe to you what sex was like and you never had sex in your entire life, you could never fully understand and grasp what it was without doing it. Then when you do it, you're like, oh, okay, now I understand. So it's similar in that way to it's a very deep experience that sort of proves to you the rationalization that comes afterward.
What was kind of the fundamental knowledge you came out of it? So talking about when you say you were like, I was a hardcore atheist. Does that mean, and I have many friends who have been on this side, militant atheist, which is, it's not just I'm neutral to religion, but religion is stupid and evil. And so if I talk about it, I'm a little irritated by it. Like, I don't want to talk about religion. Is that how atheist you were?
That is. Okay. That is how the atheist I was.
What did you find out? What do you now know? What did you experience that made you think there is a God, there is some intelligence? What was it? Was it a plan? Was it an intelligence? What did you detect? What did you feel?
So the very first thing that it showed me, and this came across again as an experience, it showed me that I don't know shit. It literally told me, you don't know anything. So all these rationalizations you're trying to put around things, these labels and definitions, atheist, religious, that's all garbage. Even and it even showed me that our science is garbage. It's just, our science essentially is just, it's a way of measuring our external environment based upon the abilities that our senses give us to measure. And although that's amazing and that's fantastic, and that was my religion before this, really, was science. It showed me that the way I was looking at the world was through a tiny little lens. And again, it's like that image, the black and white image. It's like I'm only seeing the faces and you weren't seeing that center part. So you're ignoring an entire part of reality that makes it real and that makes it whole. And you weren't able to see it.
So So you said in that stretch, you said an it. So are you feeling a creator, a creative force, a plan? Did you feel the presence of another intelligence? You felt in dialogue in some way with something else?
I did, definitely. I felt like I was in dialogue with something, like metaphysically, like within my mind or something. And it felt as if it was an external higher intelligence, something that had so much power that it could put me down, lay me out, or it could rise me up to enlightenment. And also, another very interesting part of this is something that I've never felt in my entire life before, that also contributed to the spiritual nature of the way I look at it now. Is I felt this interconnectedness with everyone and everything. It's almost like I felt myself in everyone. I felt everyone in myself. I felt their pain. I felt their joy. And not just with every person, but every animal, every plant. So what I'm seeing is like this, what I refer to as like a Gaian mind, like the Earth's intelligence. It almost felt as if I was merging with the wisdom of nature itself. And I never thought that was anything that was possible. I always thought that nature was something that we sort of fight against, we control, and that is like a scary place that we don't want to be in. But what I realized was that we are nature. Like, we're part of this thing. We weren't like put here or something. We were birthed from this whole gigantic biosphere, this massive ecosystem of one.
So you have this experience, you learn things, and you feel them on a different level of knowing. When you come back out, one of the things, religion, spirituality, oftentimes, if you experiencing, the intent is to in some way, not always, alter your behavior in some way. You have a new mission, you have new things you didn't understand, and that alters how you experience and react to things around you. What was did you feel like there was an expectation on the part of the plan or the intelligence that you would act differently? Or was it just like, here's information, I don't have a plan, man, go do whatever you want with this? Did you feel like you're supposed to do something at the end?
I didn't feel like there was anything specific that it told me to do, but what I felt was an overwhelming sense of a shift in priority and a shift in the way that I thought about the entire breadth of reality. It reprioritized the way, or it helped to reprioritize the way I think about relationships, the way I think about family, the way I think about my work, how I spend my time. It flipped everything. It changed absolutely everything, including, so I've been with the same person, my fiance, for coming up on 16 years. And it really helped to, this is another story, and like another aspect of it. It helped to solidify our relationship as well, in a very, very profound way. So there's that part too.
Okay, so that raises it solidified. Does that mean your partner also had experiences like this, or you came out of it a different person and that caused your relationship to change, but it was only you shifting?
Initially, it was only me shifting. Okay. But then when I approached her and I said, hey, listen, because we were going through some rough times, and I said, if you really want to make this work, there's this thing we could try together that I think could help us to communicate and connect on a deeper level. So she's like, all right, cool, let's do it. So we tried it, and it changed everything. I mean, it was like we have basically two like halves of our relationship, before psychedelics and after psychedelics. I mean, it just reshifted our priorities in an insane way, to where, prior, we weren't each other's top priority 100%. And what this did was it connected us again in a way where we realigned our priorities to be number one on each of our lists. So no matter what we did, we always thought of each other. And I mean, that's just one of the many ways that it helped to reprioritize the way we think about our relationship. But it allowed us to communicate and opened us up in a way that like dissolves and breaks down the walls that you put up to protect yourself and to protect your ego. And when you break those walls down, you can let people in because it's like you're leading with your heart as opposed to your mind.
So I'll just play devil's advocate. So I'm thinking of, so from a religious angle, what you're describing, it sounds like an amazing mystical experience. And then you go back, and when you return to life, I'm like, well, this is just your ego putting your mystical experience to work. So every person, we are little sexual animals, and we partner up with other animals sometimes inside of our society. And this is just your ego figuring out how to make that little sex relationship you have a little better. So that's it. You made it a little better. You feel better. Your anxiety's less. Your depression's less. You feel more centered. Your priorities are better. And that's all sounds like, oh man, hey man, that's a whole lot of ego. So the argument back, hey, it's kind of like you had this experience and your ego's like, oh yeah, that's great. I like all those things. Utilitarian wise, I'm going to make you a more efficient, happier human being. Boom, problem solved. Is there anything deeper that goes against your ego in your day to day where you're like, ooh, this is hard for me. I can feel there's a fight in me.
Well, I think a common misconception with people who are doing psychedelics is that you're supposed to obliterate your ego.
Sure.
And you're never supposed to like have it return again. But I think the point is like your ego, it's the most important part of who you are. It's this autopilot mode that we live every day in. So the way I like to look at it is like the psychedelic experience helped to inform my autopilot ego mind to like navigate the world in a more productive and loving way.
Okay, that carries, because my favorite thing is the Zen saying where the master comes and says, first there's mountains and rivers, then no mountains and rivers, then mountains and rivers. Like, oh, so that's what first I was tied up in the ego, then I'm like, ego obliteration. But you don't stop at ego obliteration, you go back to some other, because the ego doesn't go away. It doesn't disappear, you don't turn into an amorphous entity that sort of flows into the universe. You go back to being you, just a different kind of you acting differently.
Yeah, they say chop wood, carry water. Do the laundry. You do the laundry before ecstasy, and you do the laundry afterward. You still have to do all this stuff, and you can have this insane mystical experience. But if it's not informing what you do in this reality, in this world, then what's the point?
What do you think is the difference between what happened to you and what seems to happen to other people, whether they're experiencing extreme mental illness, or whether they've taken hallucinogenic drugs, or they've gone through a really stressful period, or creatively their just mind opens them up to an understanding and they decide they have this massive mission. So some people come out of this mystical experience and they're wildly driven in some new way. What do you hear from people that happens to them, where they come out and like, oh my God, my life, now I have this mission I'm supposed to do. And then other people, again, like you, I go back to, chopping wood and carrying water. Like it's kind of the same thing I was doing before.
Yeah, definitely. You hear people that talk about, oh, I had this clear message of what I'm supposed to do, and I'm supposed to do this and that, and like this exact clear path. And great for them. That's amazing. I love that. I didn't experience anything like that. And usually people who experience that, it depends on the substance as well. Like my favorite is psilocybin mushrooms. I also really love DMT in a smoked form. But a lot of people that have like the very clear path and clear message are people who participate in ayahuasca ceremonies, which is basically another form of DMT, but it's a mixture of plants that allows DMT to be edible. So you drink this brew, and these plants, they mix together, and the DMT gets activated in your brain, and you have an extended DMT state.
Okay.
And that is usually done under like a shamanic ritual, because these are it's an ancient brew from thousands of years ago in the Amazon. And that's where people mostly have those experiences. So it's definitely dependent on the substance, the dose, again, the set and setting, what you're bringing to it. If you're looking for those kinds of answers, if you're looking for meaning and purpose in your life, a lot of times you can use these substances to help direct you in the right way.
Okay. So again, playing from devil's advocate, we kind of started, you said, science used to be my religion. The great thing about science, as much as there's a lot of sort of shared reality and people agreeing on things, science mostly says, we tried this, it led to this. If you try this, it will lead to this. We can prove it again and again and again and again that it is exactly going to work like this. Drug A does this. Here are the things that could have their side effects. So we analyze all that, but this leads to this. And then when people try it themselves, they're like, right, this leads to this. In this case, when you get into religion, spirituality, mysticism, mind-altering drugs, mind-altering states, people's reactions to them, the A leading to B does not seem to always lead to A to B. So I'm wondering if in talking to people about these experiences, you've had some people where I did exactly what I was supposed to, nothing happened, I got no knowledge. So in other words, the experiment was not repeatable. It didn't repeat for me.
Yes, the experience, it can run the gamut.
Okay.
Some people have no experience at all. And that also depends on like maybe if you're on certain medications. Like I know if you're on SSRIs, these substances don't work well with them, so they can sort of be canceled out. Also, benzodiazepines don't work well with them. People actually use benzodiazepines. That's what they call like a trip abort. So if they're having like a rough time, you can take some benzos or something, which I don't recommend. Because I believe the experience should be able to work itself out because it tends to tie itself up in a nice little bow, even if you are having a rough experience. But yeah, it's very dependent upon like dosage, set and setting, so many different things.
Are there, in exploring this enough, where you went out and explored enough, where you had a feeling, I know the kind of physical environment, I know what I want to be hearing and seeing, I know who I would be comfortable having there and who not comfortable. I know the kind of drug I'm going to try. As you go out and explore, does it seem like there's when people ask you, what should I do? Do people offer clear guidelines, or as you said, it can run the gamut? So we can't say for sure if really, maybe you would have the best experience with a bunch of people around. Maybe you'd have the best experience completely by yourself. Maybe you'd have the best experience in a sensory deprivation tank. It's all the options. Is it such a wide gamut of recommendations? You can't really say, if you're going to do this drug, you need to set your situation up like this.
Yeah, I mean, I have recommendations depending on where you want to go and what kind of experience you want to have. But I mean, there are group experiences. I spoke of ayahuasca just before. Usually you do that with like 20 people in the room. And you can have just as profound experiences with groups as you can by yourself, but the experience will be different. It'll be like profound in a different way. Personally, I like to do it with like maybe 1, 2, 3 people that I'm close with and that I can trust. In like a very mellow and relaxed environment. Some people like to do like ecstatic dance while they do it. I mean, that's not really my style, but I used to, again, I've been dogmatic throughout like my whole life. I started off being a dogmatic atheist. And even when I started doing psychedelics, I was very dogmatic on how to do it. I was like, you got to do it this way to get this experience. This is the way to do it. But then eventually I just learned like, that's not like, let go of the dogma. These experiences can range in such a wide variety. And again, I don't know shit. I'm just, on this path like everybody else,
So thinking about a lot in this country, especially, I was fascinated. Early America, I feel like we had these two strong strands. We have freedom-loving people who want to make sure there's a separation of church and state and that people are free to live their own lives the way they see fit, and the government and the church should leave them alone. And then on the other side, you have Puritans. We have a strong puritanical streak in this country where discipline and rigor and the Protestant work ethic and these things are hard coded in. And then drug abuse infuriates the people who think you need to stay disciplined and controlled. And these drugs, specifically, you're describing a situation where you are becoming uncontrolled. So it doesn't mean you're not rampaging, but you're out of control. And so some people just say, that's wrong. You need to be in control. And so anything that makes you out of control, we're not comfortable with, which may be one reason this stuff gets outlawed. So overall, what are your thoughts about substances and adults using them? I mean, because we talked about some of the drugs, you're like, I didn't do coke, I didn't do heroin. Those things can lead to serious problems. How do you feel about drug legalization and the law when it comes to these drugs?
It's a really interesting issue because I really do believe that as adults, we should be able to alter our consciousness in any way we see fit. If I want to go get a bunch of heroin and coke, I should be able to do that. Okay. And what you see now is a situation where the regulation is so ridiculous that people people are always going to go out and seek these substances out. For thousands and thousands of years, we co-evolved with plants and mind-altering substances. So people are going to always seek them out. But what I believe we should do as the richest and most developed country in the world is to educate people about how to use drugs, and also to provide them with sources of drugs that are pure. Because most of the time, the deaths, the overdoses, there are people who are just buying street drugs or buying them off like some Chinese website, and they're dying of fentanyl overdoses or something when they really wanted to just get like, a benzo or whatever. So it's about purity. It's about making sure that it's in a safe and contained environment, and that we're educated on how to use these substances, as opposed to just saying like, nope, do not use them. Because then you create a society of people who don't know what they're doing, and they're learning from their peers, as opposed to learning from people who like know what's going on and know what's happening, know what these substances do to your mind. Because ultimately, we should be able to merge these two groups, like the left progressivism and, the right conservative nature. We should be able to merge them and not just have one or the other. We need to find a healthy balance of both intellectual education and also spiritual knowledge.
What are the parts of freedom when it comes to using and having these experiences, having them change your life? What are the parts, as you sit back, you say, I see these risks? Because I think a lot of times when you see people who push, so the people who are against legalizing drugs talk about all the risks, and the people who are for legalizing drugs talk none of the risks. So it seems like the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. What are risks that you take very seriously, knowing that, look, some percentage of the population is going to become addicted and overuse these things? What do you see as the major risks for, like, hey, if we did open this up and we did it the best possible way, human beings would still get messed up in these three ways? What are the ways you see?
I mean, there are definitely risks. But honestly, if I go down the street to a McDonald's and I get a cheeseburger with all those chemicals in it, like there's a risk there too. I'm taking a risk. If I go drink alcohol or smoke cigarettes, I'm taking big, massive risks. It's just we value certain risks over others.
Yeah.
And it depends on the drug too. When it does come to cocaine and heroin and things like that, opiates, the risks are very much physical when it comes to dependency. When it comes to psychedelics, the risks are psychological, because these substances they're literally by definition anti-addictive. It's almost impossible. Well, you can't become physically dependent on, say, psilocybin mushrooms. It's not possible. But you can become psychologically addicted to anything. You can become psychologically addicted to marijuana, to the experience of touching God, if you feel that on psychedelics. So there are definite risks. And another big risk with psychedelics are just, psychotic breaks and psychological ailments. There's people who just shouldn't do them. It's not that they're for everyone, which is why, again, I think the education aspect of it is so important, because then we understand, am I predisposed to having a psychotic break? Should I not take psychedelics because of that? But the research, it was halted for over 40 years. So we're just now beginning to see a lot of these experiments and a lot of this research coming to forward now.
What has you most in the work? So you have a podcast and you talk to people about esoteric philosophy. You talk to them about psychedelics. You talk about these experiences they have. Is it the science catching up with this that has you interested these days? Or is it mostly talking about the anecdotal experiences that people have and sort of the down in the trenches crafting of experiences and the crafting of different experiences that people are trying? Or is it like, oh no, I like the fact that science is catching up with this? Or do you still feel like I had a break with science and I'm just not that much into it?
It's everything.
Okay.
I still love science. I talk to a lot of scientists, philosophers, doctors, people who are, PhDs in psychology, a lot of them, because a lot of them are working with these substances in a therapeutic way. And actually I have there are so many studies that you can see that that show that these things are helping people with treatment-resistant depression and things like that. But yeah, the whole gamut, really. It's also interesting to me because what psychedelics help to do is increase my curiosity. And obviously, you know, my curiosity revolving around these substances has been heightened dramatically. So anything that can shed light on what this stuff is, what it means, what the experience is, because ultimately, like, it was an amazing, I have had, you know, a bunch by now. These have been amazing experiences that have changed my entire life. And some of the things that I've experienced and merged with, I cannot put a label to, and I have no idea what they are. So any philosophy that helps me to sort of flesh out what it is that I experienced is definitely of high interest to me.
What is, you know, again, you mentioned, hey, atheism, and then experiencing some kind of supernatural divinity, intelligence, creativity happening in the universe. What is your attitude now about the wide variety of sometimes dogmatic religions, but oftentimes that start with a mystical experience? How do you look at religion now differently than you did before your experience?
I respect religion way more. I respect religious people a lot more, because to me, I'm going to bring up, there's a spiritual teacher named Ram Dass. He passed away, but he used to always say that spirituality is like a giant mountain, and every single person, we're all positioned at the base of this mountain at like a different spot. And we're all starting somewhere. And, you know, whether you're starting as an atheist or, you know, a psychedelic guy or a Muslim or a Christian or a Catholic, you know, but ultimately we're all headed toward the same path. We're all going up that mountain. And when we meet at the top, we're intermingling with Christians and, you know, all of us, we're all intermingling together, and you can't tell who got there with which path. We're all pointing to the same thing. We're all trying to get to the same place. So I respect religions in that way, where I do believe we're all sort of pointing to that same thing. We're trying to fill that void, that very noticeable void of something existing outside of ourselves.
Can I ask, if somebody hears this and they're curious, so maybe you could give two recommendations. One is thinking about legislative and science. If you're curious about digging into the science or the laws in your area, I send people to this website. And on the other side, no, I'm much more curious about these personal stories and crafting experience for myself. So maybe sort of a societal thing. I'm curious about society and hallucinogenics, or personal hallucinogenics. Where would you send people? Might be the same place, might be different, whatever you want.
So the most comprehensive website that I've come across, it's called psychedelicstoday.com. It was created by Kyle Bowler and Joe Moore. They have a podcast as well. They are fantastic. It's a full-fledged psychedelic education center. I actually took one of their courses. Their course, it was called Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists, and then the second part of it was Integration and Self-Care. And it was a fantastic course. Actually, my podcast sort of was birthed from that course, because there was this, at the end of it, there's an integration project is what they call it. And you're supposed to put together everything that you've learned in the class and either create a piece of art or a plan or, you know, something like that for how you're going to move forward in your future with this knowledge. So I decided to, you know, map out and structure this podcast that I do with my brother, who's also interested in the same things. So that's the place I would go. If people ask me, like sometimes they'll ask me like, oh, you know, should I do psychedelics? Should I try them? And I always say, no, I do not recommend anybody ever take psychedelics. What I do recommend, however, is that you research psychedelics intensively. Do as much research as possible. And in the end, if you feel like it's something that you should do, then by all means, go and have at it. Have a great time. But at absolute least, if you do as much research as possible into these substances, what you'll be introduced to topics that are going to expand what you thought the world could possibly offer. It's going to help you to expand your philosophy and your ideas of what's possible, and it's going to introduce you to a lot of things that may change your life.
So wait a second. If somebody just they want fun and an altered state of consciousness, the first thing you do is you give them homework?
Absolutely. Yes. The most important thing is to me is to do these substances correctly, or quote unquote correctly, responsibly, knowing what you're getting yourself into and doing them for the right reasons. Because in my opinion, these are such powerful substances, and should not be trifled with, because man, I've had experiences where I did trifle with them. I pushed it, and I had some really, really rough experiences too. So it's not just that you're going to take this substance and you're going to have this amazing ecstatic experience. You might have a really, really challenging time. And I've had quite a few of those too.
Wait, now I was going to end it there, but now I have to hear, maybe if you would share, because my only experience with hallucinogenics is my dad came back from Vietnam, took acid. He came back to college and took acid. And he took it from a trusted guy. He knew the guy who made it. He knew where he made it. And when that guy left the school, when he graduated, my dad's like, I'm done. I'm not getting acid from some random person. That's it for me. But he did describe like all the stuff about the things melting, bugs everywhere, and just having to stay calm. But he said that he had some messed up experiences when he took it. Would you share, because you have this, your first experience was incredible. So what, the first really bad experience you had, how did it compare? What was different about that thing from that first incredible experience?
So one of the issues, it's actually, it's a good thing and it's a bad thing.
Okay.
But psychedelics, especially mushrooms, are easy on beginners for some reason. It seems that if there is an intelligence behind it, if there is something driving it, that it's easy on beginners. And the farther and farther you go, the rougher it gets. And again, with me, I'm an idiot. So my first few experiences, like, as you kind of brought up before, it almost solidified my ego in a way where I was like, oh, I am awesome. I went through this crazy experience, and like now I have this ultra knowledge that nobody else has. And I got super cocky. So the one night we were out for a little bit, me and my friend, and my fiance was going to join us as well. She was out with one of her friends. So we all kind of came together around like 9-10 o'clock, and we planned on eating these mushrooms. And we were going to do what's called a heroic dose, a big dose, 5 grams. It's, it's like you're sealed, you're underwater, you can't escape it.
Right, okay,
it's
you're
like
getting out. You're not going to be able to shake yourself loose from this. If you're taking this amount, you're not getting out. Okay.
Yeah, you're bound to have a very powerful experience, one of the most powerful of your entire life, which there have been plenty of studies that have shown that lots of people have actually said these are the most powerful experiences of their lives. So that's what you can go in knowing, that it's going to be very powerful, very profound. So we end up hanging out for a little while, and we have a very, very deep and meaningful discussion about, our childhoods, our past. It's very deep and traumatic type stuff that happened to us in our lives. And it ends up being 3 o'clock in the morning, and we're feeling great because we just had this cathartic, 4-hour, 5-hour long conversation. We're feeling great. The mushrooms have been weighed out and measured and sitting in front of us. So we decide at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, wait, I have a quick question. I'm fascinated. I thought you meant we went there, we took the mushrooms and had this cathartic conversation. But no, you had like a you guys had this incredible, totally sober, had this incredible conversation. Now we're going to take the mushrooms.
Exactly. Okay, yes. We were completely sober when we had this conversation. And finally we decide now it's time, we're going to take them. So we take them, and this is what I mean by like respecting the substance, doing it the correct way. Like, you don't want to take mushrooms at 3 o'clock in the morning because it's going to last at least 4 to 6 hours. You don't want to do it when you're tired. You don't want to be cocky about it. I mean, it was pretty much a formula of all of the wrong ways to go about doing these substances. Setting, dose, all of it was all way off.
Okay.
So, so we proceed to take them, and we all dive into just this rabbit hole of the most challenging, in my experience, it was the most challenging experience of my entire life. I ended up like feeling this overwhelming sense of sad and sorrow, like just really, really deep. And, by this time we've done it a bunch of times. I know what the territory is like, and I tell myself, okay, you have to experience this, your consciousness is presenting you with this because there's something you have to address here, so feel this sorrow, feel the sadness, and allow yourself to cry it out. And, I just start crying, and I'm allowing myself to feel it, telling myself to surrender to the experience. But it just never ended. It was just, I had this vision in my closed eye visionary field of like a purple aura of my body, and like Death, like the character Death who carries the scythe, like came into my vision and just sliced me with his scythe from bottom to top, and out came just all of the sorrow of the entire universe. And it was just this terribly painful experience. And I mean, honestly, it taught me quite a bit. It taught me a lot. So I do say that it was like a nightmare trip. It was a really hard, challenging experience, but I can say also that I learned more from that experience probably than any other in a certain aspect.